I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how to give a preparedness presentation. Specifically, I'm going to give you some guidance and some tips on how to present to the community on this important topic. Before I get started, I just wanted to take a minute to say thank you. Thank you both for your interest in this topic and also for volunteering to help us educate the greater community on emergency preparedness. So the purpose of this recorded session or training is threefold. First, I want to walk you through the different types of preparedness presentations that you may have volunteered for or you may volunteer for in the future. Second, I want to provide some background on what things look like from an administrative and logistical perspective. What I mean here is, what do things look like from the moment that you sign up to volunteer all the way down to when you have completed your presentation? And lastly, but perhaps most importantly, I'm going to walk you through the first 15 preparedness presentation. And we're going to go through it slide by slide. And I'm going to give you tips and suggestions on what I would cover as they relate to the emergency preparedness talking points. I really want to stress that the goal of this recorded training or presentation is to make you feel prepared, supported, and most importantly, excited to lead a preparedness presentation. So let's start first with talking about the types of presentations that are related to emergency preparedness. The first type of presentation that you might sign up for, or perhaps have already signed up for, is a CART presentation. An example of this is the MLK Day of Service. In the photo on the screen, you'll see both Jen and Chasta giving a presentation to about 75 or so MLK Day volunteers. The name of this presentation was Ready, Set, Go Bag, and the purpose was to educate attendees not only on emergency preparedness, but to also incorporate a volunteer activity, which was building go bags for those in need. A second type of presentation might be a first 15 preparedness presentation. And we'll talk a lot more about first 15, but just to give you a little snapshot now, first 15 is a preparedness and response course that is given to community members and has both components of emergency preparedness as well as emergency response. And the third type of presentation that you might want to give is one that you decide to give on your own to your own network or community. CART members are ambassadors to our community, and the county manager and emergency management really see their role as being out there in the community, engaging them on this important topic. And so you might decide that you want to give a presentation to your neighborhood, to your civic association, perhaps to your organization, perhaps to your clients. And so this could possibly be a type of preparedness presentation that you end up giving. If there's one thing that I can stress when it comes to these types of presentations is that they all include the same key core emergency preparedness messaging. So even though I'm only going over the first 15 presentation today, slide by slide, that messaging that's in there is going to be similar, if not identical, to what you might find in other types of preparedness presentations. So fear not, if you've signed up for a course that's other than the first 15, I promise that what I go over today will be relevant to you. So let's talk a little bit about administrative and logistical info in terms of what to expect. Once you volunteer to give a preparedness presentation, a few things are going to happen. First, you're going to receive some sort of confirmation email and potentially a calendar invite or hold. You're going to get information sent to you via email and also potentially in that same calendar invite that covers all the logistical information that you will need to know for the day of the course. Specifically, who is the course for, where is it, when might it be occurring, arrival time, parking, what staff might be present, etc., etc. You're also going to receive a preparedness presentation PowerPoint and the accompanying notes or talking points. And this is going to be specific to the course that you're giving or to the audience that you're presenting to. For example, later on in this training, I'm going to go through the first 15. I'm going to go through every slide and I'm going to give you tips and suggestions on what to say when you are presenting that slide. But what I'm going to share with you is also reflected in a Word document. That's what I call the notes or the talking points. So in short, we give you all the material beforehand so you have ample time to review. Additionally, prior to the presentation, we'll work with you to coordinate material pickup if applicable. Materials here, what I mean here is the display emergency go bag or emergency bag, handouts that you would give to course attendees, or giveaways that you might give away at the end of the course. If possible, we try to have DIPSUM staff be present or bring the materials to you. But in the case that you are presenting and DIPSUM staff is unable to do so, we'll make sure that we coordinate any relevant material pickup. Additionally, if you need a copy of the PowerPoint on a thumb drive or need us to coordinate getting the presentation or PowerPoint to the host of the course via email or etc., we will make sure that we do that for you so that on arrival day, you'll be set to go. And then if needed, we'll also work with you to get a check-in, a virtual check-in together, or we'll practice a dry run so that you feel comfortable with all the material that you're presenting. Then upon the completion of the presentation, we'll coordinate material returns. So anything that you borrowed or anything that you were using to give the presentation, like the display emergency bag, we'll make sure that we coordinate getting that back. We'll also make sure that we provide a feedback form to both the volunteers as well as the attendees of the course. So we're going to go ahead and practice for the first 15 preparedness presentation together. But before we get into the actual slide deck that I'm going to go through, I want to talk a little bit about First 15. So first, what is the First 15? First 15 is a preparedness and response course launched at the start of 2023. The goal of this course is to provide preparedness information as well as emergency life-saving skills to the community. The pilot for this course was given to 2 organizations within our faith community, specifically the Unitarian Universalist Church and Macedonia Baptist Church. The course itself was slightly catered at the time to specifically address some of the concerns that members of the faith community might have. For example, what they might do in the case of an active shooter, or what they might do in the case of a fire in their congregation or in their facility. The audience, as I mentioned, for the pilot courses was the faith community, or is the faith community because they're still ongoing. However, the audience will continue to expand. Starting in summer of 2023, the Department of Public Safety Communications and Emergency Management plans to bring the First 15 course to AHC properties, starting with a location in Green Valley. So this course is specifically designed to address 3 big buckets, which you will see once we get into the content. The first part of the course is to give a preparedness overview. This is the part that you're going to be presenting. You're going to be educating the community member / course attendee on what to do in case of an emergency and how to prepare for one. The second part of the course is also a PowerPoint presentation, but that's going to be given by the Until Help Arrives / CERT instructors. And they're going to be giving tips and suggestions on what one should do before emergency help arrives. And lastly, the bulk of the course will be a hands-on practical, which is what you can see in the photo pictured, where a CERT or Until Help Arrives instructor will work with the attendees / community members and walk them through how to do things like stop the bleed, put on a tourniquet. So the last question I have on this slide before I move into the first 15 might be, what are you going to do if you're presenting on preparedness, but it's not first 15? As I mentioned previously, don't worry. The core messaging that is in the preparedness section of the first 15 course is the same messaging that's going to be found in all of our emergency preparedness presentations. So even though I'm not going through all of the potential emergency presentations that you might be presenting on, the messages will all be very, very similar. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started. These slides are the exact replica of the slides that you will present if you are giving the first 15 course. So the first slide is simply the title slide, and it mentions what the course is. As I mentioned before, it's both preparedness and response, it's presentation, and a hands-on learning activity as well. During this slide, I would take a moment to introduce yourself very, very briefly. You want to try to keep your introduction, if possible, to 30 seconds or under, just because the total time of this course is pretty short. For reference, the entire section for emergency preparedness for the first 15 should be approximately 15 to 17 minutes in length. So I just want to stress that you want to try to keep your introduction brief and pivot to the content of your presentation as soon as possible. The second slide just covers the agenda for the course. You want to share, what I would share on this slide is what's basically written. The purpose of the session is to prepare for an emergency, to learn how to respond to an emergency, and lastly, practice what you've learned hands-on. And then at this time during the presentation, I might say, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, just hold on to them till the end of the session. The third slide is simply a transitional slide. It just lets folks know that we're starting with the first section of the course, which is how to prepare for an emergency. Slide 4 asks the attendees, what do you think constitutes an emergency? On this slide, I would suggest taking a few answers from the group. Keep in mind, you do have a fairly short time frame, so you don't want to launch into a 20-minute conversation, but you want to hear what folks are saying and what they think makes up an emergency. What you also want to stress is that emergencies are often sudden, urgent, unexpected, and require immediate attention, and they can vary in type, from man-made to natural emergencies, like a snowstorm or a flood. Slide 5 says, how would you prepare for an emergency? On this slide, I would ask the audience that exact question, and once again, take a few answers. Slide 6 covers some of the key emergency preparedness messaging that you're going to find consistently throughout all emergency preparedness presentations. And that's the 3 steps to preparedness. The first step is being informed and knowing who to call. The second step is making a plan and emergency plan and practicing it. And the third is building an emergency kit. So then you're going to transition into slide 7, which is step 1, be informed. What you want to stress here is that emergencies can happen at any time with little or no notice. And for that reason, it's really important to be prepared, and being informed and having reliable and multiple ways of receiving information is a great first step. So for example, you could be monitoring the weather during the storm, and this will help you be situationally aware during an emergency if you know a big snowstorm's coming. Some of the images on the screen also mention ways that you can stay informed. There's a TV, there's a cell phone, which most people probably get their information from. So that could be from online sources like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You could, if you follow news sources, it could be your local news source. There's also the Weather Channel if you're following weather updates, et cetera, et cetera. Or you can use a radio. The one image on this screen or on this PowerPoint specifically is a hand crank radio. You can find it on Amazon for about $18. It allows you to charge your portable devices like a cell phone. It works as a flashlight and allows you to, if you it does run out of charge, you also can crank it and it will last through a storm. So I always recommend, if someone has the means, to have one of those in their home as well. Another way that you can stay informed is Arlington Alert. So as part of our key messaging when we are in the community, we always encourage all community members to sign up for Arlington Alert. Arlington Alert is a free program, and you will receive notifications in case of an emergency. They can go to your phone, landline, or email. You only need one to sign up. And what you want to stress here is that you only need one and you will not get spammed. So this is really, really helpful to make sure that you are staying informed of what's happening in your neighborhood in case there's an emergency. Slide 9 talks about important phone numbers and knowing who to call. Specifically, there's 3 big buckets that we're going to talk about during this presentation. The first is 911. The second is Arlington specific phone numbers that you would use in a situation that's not an emergency. And the last is phone numbers that are relevant to you or your household. So let's go through those now. Slide 10 talks about what to do in case of an emergency, call 911. And it also provides some tips for calling 911. I would go through these tips when presenting and stress that you need to know when to call 911. So when is a situation an emergency versus something that is not urgent? You want to make sure that you stress to attendees that they know their address. If they're in a multi-family building, like an apartment or a condo, you want to make sure that they know their unit number as well, because they're going to need to provide that. If they are in an area where they do not know their address, for example, let's say they're outside, are there any key indicators that they could share with the 911 dispatcher? Like, for example, if they're outside, can they see an intersection of streets? Can they see any major landmarks? So you want to walk them through knowing how to identify where they are, and also making sure that they educate their kids in the household to do the same and teach the kids in their household to know their address. You want to encourage them to stay calm. You want to encourage them to be able to describe the emergency, to be ready to answer questions. And of course, the last 2 points are quite relevant to children. You not only want to practice how to call 911, but you want to stress that you don't want to hang up on the operator, that you never want to call 911 as a prank. And it's really important to know your address when you call 911. If you cannot call 911, you can use a service called text to 911. This will be all featured on slide 11 of the presentation. And a few things you want to emphasize here: if you are unable to speak because you are incapacitated or it's unsafe to speak, you want to go ahead and just text your emergency to 911. And similarly to calling 911, you want to be able to describe what you need as well as your location. Slide 12 talks about Arlington phone numbers or other regional / statewide important phone numbers. What you want to stress here is that in the case of an emergency, you always want to call 911. But if the situation does not require you to call 911, you want to potentially have these phone numbers on hand for non-urgent situations. I oftentimes do not read every single one because that's a bit lengthy, but I might pick out one or two that might be relevant to my household or to give an example of. So for example, I'll say, in my household, we have 2 phone numbers that we always have written down. The first is the Animal Welfare League of Arlington because we have pets. The second is Arlington Public Schools phone number, and because in case we need it for kids in our household. So that would be an example of just highlighting 2 quick things on this slide without having to get into detail of all the information that's on here. Slide 3 talks about personal contacts and phone numbers. Personal contacts are numbers that are specific to the individual and the household that are important to write down. You want to stress here that these numbers, you might know them off the top of your head, or you might know them because they're listed in your common contacts, but it's really important to write them down and store that phone number somewhere safe. In an emergency, when your adrenaline is rushing, it's possible that even if you have these numbers memorized, you could forget them. Or even if you have them saved in your phone battery might die. So having them written down is really important. Some of the numbers to consider writing down: 2 emergency points of contact, 1 in town, 1 out of town. I recommend to all attendees of this course that they have 1 point of contact both in town and out of town. In town, this could be a member of your household. Out of town, in case members of your household are unable to get in touch with each other, there is 1 person outside of the area that you can both report to. Your doctor, your pharmacy, if applicable, your vet or your daycare provider, your school for kids. If you have a housing provider or you have a management company, property management company, you want to have that phone number written down as well, and any other numbers that might be relevant. Oftentimes I hear insurance company listed as a number to write down, or whether it be homeowners, renters, car, etc. Slide 14 then moves into the second step that you can do to prepare for an emergency, and that is to make an emergency plan. An emergency plan is what it sounds like. It's a plan for what you and your household will do in case of an emergency. But it's not only for your household. One of the things that I like to stress when presenting this slide is that you should also have an emergency plan for your house of worship, your building, your organization, your office, etc. It should be written down, and an emergency plan should include not only what you do in emergency, but a couple other key points, including a meeting place. So where would you go if your office, your home, your house of worship, etc. was inaccessible? Escape routes and fire exit plans, again, for your house, your house of worship, your office, etc. A copy of those important phone numbers that we talked about before, the personal contacts and the other important phone numbers. And then you also want to make sure that you include any personalized needs and important medical information in your emergency plan. So what does that mean? Slide 15 talks about personalized needs and important medical info. What this basically means is if you have specific needs within your household, such as a type of medication you might be on, or any medical devices you use, any medical alert information that might be relevant, or any transportation needs. For example, does anyone in your household use a walker or a wheelchair? These are all things that have to be planned for and factored in when writing an emergency plan. We always consider including your personalized needs and putting them somewhere visible, such as on your fridge. The reason for that is in the case that you are unable to speak and you're having an emergency happen in your home and a first responder comes to help you, they're able to quickly identify some of the key medical information that they need to know about you. The picture on the screen, the file of life specifically, is a magnet, but it does not have to be that fancy. You could simply get a piece of paper, write medical info on it, update it regularly, and stick it on your fridge, and it would have the same impact. Lastly, slide 16 says practice. So what you want to emphasize here is that an emergency plan is only as good as how many times you practice it. So you want to make sure that you not only write one down, but that you also share it with everyone in your household, including children. So if you have children in your household, make sure you're practicing what to do in case an emergency happens. Lastly, you want to make sure that you're updating the plan. I suggest every 6 months or so. The third step to being prepared is building an emergency kit, which is what slide 17 through 19 will go over. An emergency kit, is also called a go bag, disaster bag, etc. It's just basically a kit that contains all your items that you might need to sustain you during and after an emergency. Specifically things like food, water, medicine, batteries, flashlight, and other essential supplies. One of the things that I like to mention on this slide specifically, and I like to stress, is that an emergency kit does not need to be expensive. More often than not, you can find the items that you would put in your emergency kit around your household. I often challenge attendees to make it into a little bit of a scavenger hunt when they get home and see what they can find around their house that they can put in an emergency kit. I also mentioned that even if you can't find all the items, you can probably find them at your local box store or your local dollar store. Emergency kits save lives. So as I mentioned, they include the basic supplies like food, water, and medicine. Now, someone might say, well, that's okay. I have all this information. I have all these materials in my house already. So it's okay. I don't need to build a kit, right? Well, what you want to stress here is that if an emergency happens and you need to evacuate quickly, or you're in a situation where you might have a lot of stress put on you, you don't want to have to run around your house and piece things together. You don't want to have to go grab your your bottle of water from here, your canned goods, your flashlight, etc. So having them in one central place is really key, and that's part of the purpose of an emergency kit. You also, as I mentioned, you want to be able to, if you need to leave quickly, you can just grab a kit, and head out the door if you need to. So what goes in an emergency kit? This list is quite long. When I present on this slide, I don't read the entire list. Oftentimes, I will reference the display emergency kit bag that is in front of me. I will also reference a handout that will be provided to all attendees that lists all of these materials in there. You don't want to spend too much time drilling down. I'll usually pick one or two. They'll say, look, here's an example of what's in this kit. But you don't want to spend too much time because you could spend easily 30 minutes on this slide alone. So what you also want to emphasize really on this slide is that you want to remember to update your emergency kit. I usually suggest twice a year. You don't want to eat expired food. So you want to make sure that all the supplies that you have are current, have not expired. And I like to update mine per season. So I usually like to have a little extra water for the spring and summer, and I'll include things like gloves and a woolly hat for the winter. Slide number 20 talks about service/support animals and family pets. Once again, you can read a couple bullets off the screen. I also like to reference the handout that's given to attendees, which has all this information on it as well. Slide 27 is simply a recap slide. So it goes over what you've given or what information you've provided during the presentation, how you identify an emergency, being informed and knowing who to call, making an emergency plan and practicing, building an emergency kit, and doing all that makes you prepared. And slide 22 is the final slide in the presentation section of the first 15 course. When you reach this slide, you've reached the end of your part of the presentation. And so this is where you would ask if there's any questions, you would take any questions from the attendees, etc. And also, if you don't know the answer to some of these questions, it's okay to say, I'll get back to you, right? I think a lot of times people get anxiety about presenting because they worry that they don't know they won't know the answer to some of the questions. But that's what I really want to stress here. That if you're not confident in the answer or you get a question that you don't know, just say, I'll get back to you and get their information, and we'll make sure that you get the answers, once we check in together. And that's it. So once you hit the slide, if you're given the first 15 presentation, this is the point when CERT or until help arrives would sign on, and they would be presenting the remainder of the course. So that brings me to the end of my tutorial today. So if you have any questions on anything I've presented, whether it's on tips or tricks for giving a presentation, or it's anything related to the content of the presentation, please email us at CART, C-A-R-R-T, at arlingtonva.us or oem@arlingtonva.us. Once again, I cannot thank you enough for your time, your efforts, and for volunteering. And we look forward to continuing to work together.